Good morning and welcome to Mental Health Monday. My name is Steve Reed. I'm pastor of H2O Church in Orlando and a licensed mental health counselor. And this is the place that we try to take a little bite-sized piece of things dealing with mental, emotional, and spiritual health because as we grow in awareness of those things, it can lead to movement, and movement can lead to freedom. And it is for freedom that Christ set us free. So we've been, over the past couple of weeks here in the month of September, we've been looking at story. And we have taken a look at a few different pictures of story, and we've started taking our own pictures in our mind of places in our story. And so today we're going to continue that process, and this may actually be longer than 4 times. This is the third out of some number because this one, to take bite-sized pieces, story is a significant piece of what affects us. As a matter of fact, if we think about it, how I interpret my story makes a huge difference in how I live out my story. And so as that is the reality, then it makes it more and more challenging if we don't live well into our story. So today we're going to be invited down some pathways that even are a little bit more challenging in looking at story. And we're going to be led down some of that pathway by a psychologist and teacher and therapist by the name of Dan Allender. And so Dan Allender writes and does much of his work on the nature of stories. He says that our stories, one of the goals is to be able to tell our story in the context of God's story. Sometimes our story is too disconcerting or too difficult, and we therefore want to isolate those pieces of our story, erase those pieces of our story, and Dan Allender invites us into not shying away from those difficult, disconcerting places in our story. He says our life is a story. We actually are story crazed, and you think about it. So the truth is, we find ourselves attracted to story. In the news, it's something about a story that grabs our attention. We long for stories, our movies, our binging on Netflix. Sometimes it's to distract us from our own story, and sometimes it's just to help us navigate our own story. What they say has the most depth and the impact in our lives. Which story is it? Is it a story of a marriage that is struggling or even failing? Marriage can become a compelling story, taking all of our attention. What about if I have a child who is battling with illness? That necessitates my attention. I can't look away from that reality of that story. And so it might be another one where I've made a meaningful number of financial mistakes, and I'm dealing with the consequences of those mistakes perhaps for years, and I am drawn into my story in those ways. I can't run away from my story in those places, and yet I want to. And Dan Allender invites us to recognize that we are more than the sum of our stories. We are in fact a unique once on the earth life. And that once on the earth life that reveals the story of Jesus in a fashion that no one else will ever do. And that is an interest, that is a challenge for us, but that is something that he invites us into. One thing I've always appreciated about Dan Allender, but I've also strongly disliked about Dan Allender, is this: he's willing to invite us into the uncomfortable, in order to invite us into our bigger story. Dan Allender invites us to linger longer than we prefer to in those moments when we felt shame. He says shame is one of evil's most potent weapons, his most effective weapons to silence us and to shut us down. It's where he divides our hearts most effectively from God, from others, and even from ourselves. And so Dan's invitation is to linger longer than we'd prefer in those moments where we feel shame. He invites us to look at our relational history, our connection history, our sexual history, and notice how evil was stealing, killing, and destroying pieces of us along the way in those very difficult places in our story. He was destroying hope and integrity and joy, even those pieces of us as a man or as a woman. He suggests we take a pen and a paper and we write out those places in our story as if it were fiction. Sometimes that can invite us into the reality of our story and the reality of our life that we're apt to just kind of skirt past as if it has no impact on us. So he invites us to do all these things, and it's kind of like, well, why would I want to do that? That sounds horrible. Why would I want to think about and linger on those places of shame in my life? Why would I want to spend any time leaning into those kinds of things? I don't want to lean into those things. I want to run away from them. And he says, okay, I get that, but his invitation is to realize that healing comes when I'm willing to face the truth, deep and specific truth about myself, and it's when my deepest desires are seen in light of what I can't do for myself that I turn again and again to the one who loves me, even in my aching places. And he knows my weaknesses and sin better than anyone in the universe. Healing comes, he says, when our story is raw, bone deep, and full of hunger for what only Jesus can offer. And there is this awareness that he has that our stuff is not too much for God, and our stuff is not too much for the healing that the Lord can provide. And so his invitation to move into those places and linger longer in shame and difficult places in our lives has nothing to do with torture. It has nothing to do with trying to help us be uncomfortable. It has everything to do with leaning into healing. Healing comes when our story is raw, bone deep, and full of hunger for what only Jesus can offer. He invites us toward healing by understanding and engaging in the painful places our hearts have traveled. And so as we are led by this man who has lots of challenging places in his own story and has walked through with so many men and women in healing journeys and is now looked to by men and women and therapists as a coach for many of us in how to help heal trauma, his invitation is don't skirt away from those things. Don't let other stories distract us from the story of what we have been invited into as we dig into those places, as we lean into those places of shame our story brings us. Then we can invite ourselves into that place of healing that only comes when we get to that place when it's more than we can actually handle. And it invites us to turn back to the one who loves us, and we will never be too much for him. So I've invited each of us to take some Polaroid moments in our own stories, maybe 10 or 12 Polaroid moments that stand out as places that they stand out as places that I've learned something about me, or something about the world, or something about others, something about life. And those things are ones that we are, over time, as we build, we're going to be noticing how those moments weave together in our story. We want to pick up those Polaroids that we've already picked on, and if you haven't already started noticing Polaroid moments, that's okay. You can start that today. just be thinking about things that there's a moment in time that taught me something about me. There was a message in that moment. And it may have taught me something about life or about others. And what I want to do is then be able to write down. And today we're going to go one step beyond the Polaroid moment and the message that it has, and we're going to step into noticing what Dan Allender invites us into, which is noticing those things that were stolen, killed, or destroyed in that moment, especially if it was a difficult or challenging moment. So I've shared about one of my Polaroid moments, and I'm sharing about it on purpose. Number one, because it's real and raw, but also because it is less sensitive than some of the other moments that have to do with my masculinity or who I am as a person. And so this one was a Brussels sprouts moment. And I've shared how I was at the table, and the rule in our house was everything needs to disappear from your plate before you can leave the table. And I had already had Brussels sprouts at a previous time, and I realized that this did not go well with me. I hated the taste of it in my mouth. As I started smelling them, my mouth started getting that dry, kind of sticky place that feels like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to be able to swallow this down and keep it. And after everybody had left the table, I just sat there for what felt like days, and was probably only minutes. And then finally I decided I don't want to stay here all night, and I gobbled them down. And as I gobbled them down, I felt that same stuff kind of growing more and more inside my mouth, that salivary response, and the tightening in my throat, and kind of some clenching in my stomach. And suddenly the plate had all the Brussels sprouts back on it again, but in different form. And there was all kinds of things with the shame of having to have been there for forever and being the last one at the table and not finishing everything. And then all of those pieces of shame of actually throwing up on my plate, and all of those pieces. And so I was there, and what I look at is I think about what was stolen, what was killed, and what was destroyed in that moment. What was stolen, my sense of I get to choose. There's something in that is strong, that I get to choose. I have a say. Even as a young kid, what do I get to choose? And that was stolen. What was killed was my dignity in a number of different ways. Dignity disappeared and was killed. And what was destroyed? A sense of adventure, trying something new, wanting to try something new, because something new in this way was revolting, and I didn't get a choice. Once I had it, I had to finish it, and it was like, well, what if I taste it and I don't like it? And so now there is a new thing in my story that says something new is dangerous, something new could be bad. And so what's stolen is my sense that I get to choose, what's killed is my dignity, and what's destroyed is my sense of adventure. And as a young boy, those things play out all the way through the rest of my story, don't they? And for you, as a young man or as a young woman, there are those moments where there are things that happen that challenge us in our story in a significant way, and they play out through the rest of our story. So why is it helpful to look at what was stolen, killed, and destroyed? It's helpful because the healing path, parts of the healing path, are things that push against those very things that were stolen, killed, or destroyed. So my healing path has included things that ask questions. Well, what path helps restore my dignity? What path redevelops my voice? What path brings back courage in adventure? And primarily a path of discovering that my Creator loves me, that He loves me through and through, and loved me through all of that. And right now He offers me those restorative, healthy pathways if I will lean into them. So again, I shared about Brussels sprouts, but there's also deeper, harder places that my heart has journeyed, and likely yours has too. Allender says that our healing begins when we engage our story, and accelerates when we engage it with a qualified story listener. We find the themes to lean into, and we figure out what are the things that are going to be the most helpful for us as we're moving into our healing journey. And so I hope today I want to just leave you with a thought that those Polaroid moments, I want to take a look then at my Polaroid moment. I want to notice what is the message I got from that. And I want to be able to notice what was, especially if it was a difficult moment, I want to notice what was stolen, killed, or destroyed. And as I begin to notice that, I may notice that some of these things line up in a similar way. That at times, similar things were stolen in some of these other Polaroid moments. And we start noticing some themes in our story, some things that the evil one has purposely attacked. And that's helpful to notice those themes. We'll talk more about that next time. This is harder stuff, right? This isn't the how I can feel good today. This is the how I can grapple with the hard things so that I can feel better and lean more effectively into my healing story tomorrow. I can do it starting today as I engage my story, but I want to invite you to do it wisely. So as you lean into your story, do it in a bite-sized piece. As you lean into your story, do it in a bite-sized piece that at the back end you can connect with a good friend. You can do something kind to yourself. You can practice good self-care. Because these things are challenging, they're difficult, they're hard. And my invitation is to not do it alone. To find a good friend who is one of those who Dan Allender calls a qualified story listener. I like that term. That's somebody who can navigate with me through the difficult places in my story without a judgment call, just being able to hear and validate that my story was real and be able to invite me down a path of healing. So I hope today is a great day for you and this week is a great week. Let's lean into our stories together. Take care.